couple of nice catfish.
Did you? Where?
Down at, Thorn. Old tree farm. Long farm, right by the river. Close, close. Catfish. One dead and then another was gone. Very nice. Close.
I'd like to open the July 27th Common Council meeting at 7 p.m. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone this evening. We'll start out today with a roll call, please.
Steve Beardsley,
Present.
Mike Wright,
Present.
Brant Fuller,
Present.
Joe Palmer,
Present.
Megan Sheets, Clarence Worthen,
Present.
Eric Woods.
Present.
Thank you, Carol. Next on the agenda are the minutes from the July 15th meeting. Is there any discussion or comments on those? I'd entertain a motion.
I move we accept amendments as written for July 13th.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Steve Beardsley,
Aye.
Mike Wright.
Aye.
Brant Fuller.
Aye.
Joe Palmer.
Aye.
Megan Sheets.
Aye.
Clarence Worthen,
Aye.
Eric Woods.
Abstain.
Thank you, Carol. Are there any public comments? Nothing for tonight. Okay, next on the agenda is ordinance 20-13. And I would entertain by title only or in its entirety.
So moved.
By
Second.
title only.
I'm sorry, who was the motion? Was it by
Joe and then Brand.
To read by title only.
Thank you. Ordinance 20-13, an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Frankfort, Indiana, establishing new water rates and charges.
That's okay. I think it- We'll just do it like this.
Roll call, Steve Beardsley,
Aye.
Mike Bright,
Aye.
Brant Fuller,
Aye.
Joe Palmer,
Aye.
Megan Sheets,
Aye.
Clarence Worthen,
Aye.
Eric Woods.
Aye.
Okay, then I would ask for a motion to pass this on first reading. After we make the first and the second, before we do any roll calls, I'm going to ask Westlers that is here, and I believe Lauren's here. We have Todd, Kent, whoever's gonna speak, we'll have you speak then after that.
Okay.
Anyone?
I'll move that we pass ordinance 2013 on first reading.
I'll second.
Okay, we've had a first and a second. Todd, do you wanna start out for us?
Sure.
And introduce who's here?
Thank you for everyone for having us here tonight. I just want to start, I'll get started and then I'll have Dylan Lambermont from Westlers come up and give his presentation. Then from there, we'll turn it over. Steeple?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we can have questions on the ordinance. But this is something that's been in the works for several years now, probably in between 3 and 4. It's been talked about. We've just been taking baby steps to get to where we need to be. And it's, we're getting, I wouldn't say dire straits, but we're getting pretty close on some issues that we have, where a water rate is, needed, which you'll see some diagrams, some pictures and things like that here in a little bit. This has nothing to do with what the county's doing. It is just for our present ratepayers, the city limits, and, that's one of the big things that we want to emphasize. It is just our infrastructure that we're looking at right now that's needing upgrades, needing a new or to expand the plant to full capacity, go to a different way of treating the water, which I'll let the experts explain all that. It becomes much better from them. But I'll turn it over to Dylan, and let's get started that way.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Todd.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening. Hi, I'm Dylan Lambermont. I'm an engineer with Westler Engineering, and I might be a new face to you, but I'm here with Marty Westler today to just give an overview of the things that we've been working on with the Water Department and the Utility Board. I believe you all have the handout that I'm going to speak from. There's 3 pages. Okay. So I'm going to go high level, but certainly if you have questions about the things that I talk about, or maybe some things that I don't talk about, I'm happy to answer those. So we've, with Water Department and the Utility Board, have developed essentially 2 documents. We've worked on a capital improvements plan for the water utility, and then also a preliminary engineering report. And that preliminary engineering report is going to take a group of capital projects and allow us to go get funding through the SRF loan program. So this first page summarizes the need. So the things that we encounter that the system needs, the problems that need to be fixed. So from a capacity standpoint, we're looking at a 20-year planning period. So what's happening today, and then what's going to be happening in your community in the next 20 years in terms of needs. Over the next 20 years, based on primarily increases in the industrial park, we're projecting that the water consumption is going to go up by about another 2 million gallons per day. So by 2040, another 2 million gallons per day. So it's another 50% in consumption, which is quite a bit of additional water. At the same time, the Armstrong Road plant, the plant that was built in 2010, is operating at its capacity. It is needed really to meet your current and the 20-year planning period water demands. So that's capacity in a nutshell. From a condition standpoint, you've got a lot of facilities. Some are new and okay. The McKinley plant, it's inoperable. It's been out of service for several years. I would describe it in poor condition, okay? And another thing we look at is useful life. How long should these assets serve their purpose for your community? And it's beyond its useful life. Just down the road from there as well, 16 and 17, those 2 wells are starting to fail. They've been, rehabilitation has been attempted at those to try to bring those back up to capacity, but just hasn't been successful. So we expect those to fail anytime, and they also are beyond their useful life. Now, the Armstrong Road plant and the well field are all relatively new. Wells were started in 92, and it has progressed since then. Those are in good condition, and those are also set up for a capacity expansion. You've got 3 elevated water tanks in the system, with the newest one being out in Jefferson. Those tanks are expensive assets, and they require maintenance and upkeep to keep them in proper working order. Also, safety standards have changed since 1961 when the 2 tanks in town were installed. So as you go in and rehabilitate those tanks, bring them up to current OSHA standards is very important. Lead service lines. There are estimated to be 1,500 lead goosenecks in the water system, and those need to be replaced. The meters that is your cash register for the billing for the water department, they're old. Chris had taken a sample of those and had them tested to see how accurate they are, and they're not operating accurately. When meters get inaccurate, they get inaccurate low, which affects revenue. So from looking out at the distribution system, NDOT's doing a lot of work. Okay, we've got the new gas tax revenue. They're putting that money to use. Unfortunately, it's having impacts on your water system. State Road 28, significant amount of water main replacement that is needed there, and also on State Road 75, or excuse me, 75. In addition to that, built into the rates has never been an annual budget for water main replacement. So from the distribution system standpoint, maintenance and planning for replacement of those water mains is an important part of the budgeting process. Because the additional demand is going to be in the industrial park, we need to ensure that we can get the water to those customers and ensure water quality to the places such as Jefferson, those types of things. So improvements are needed to ensure that the distribution system hydraulics continues to operate properly over the 20-year period. We've also got to make sure we're doing inspection and maintenance of these assets that you're putting money into up front to ensure that they fulfill their useful life and can serve their purpose for the duration that they need. And then finally, when we expand the Armstrong Road water treatment plant, it will house over 1,500 pounds of chlorine gas. That puts that facility into another tier of EPA air regulation. And to be frank, the regulatory requirements from that are significant. So to look at that, we've laid out options, looked at a 20-year net present value for those different options to try to figure out what was the best solution for that facility in the years to come. So that's a summary from you. Any questions so far? Okay. So,
I have a question.
sure.
You see our meters are becoming inaccurate?
No.
You have a rough estimate on what we're losing because of,
I'm gonna turn to my partner, Chris.
I would say probably, I think out of the 20 or so we had tested, that I'm gonna say maybe the 5 to 7% range off, 2% what AWA standards, I'd say. We have roughly 6,000 meters, and I'm gonna say, I think the average age is 2011, 2012. Yeah.
okay.
Thank you. So if it's okay, I'll go to page 2 and talk about the solution. So the proposed project is really a two-part solution. Okay, the first part is a capital project, list of capital projects to be funded through the SRF loan program. So here's a summary of the project costs and the project names and the project costs. So we're going to expand the Armstrong Road well field to replace wells 16 and 17. That plant, as I mentioned, was set up for expansion. We're going to go ahead and expand it out to its full capacity. The selected solution for the chlorine gas facility is really to go away from chlorine gas. It's a very hazardous substance. Regulatory requirements were burdensome. And from a cost basis, really we're going to buy salt, we're going to send it through some equipment, and we're going to make chlorine. It'll be a very safe process, and for over a 20-year planning period, a cost-effective solution as well. The east and west tanks will get control valves. That will help the water operators ensure that the tanks are filling and emptying at the same rates, and ensure we're able to push water out to areas that are maybe a little bit more remote, such as Jefferson and those areas. Facilities that are decommissioned, we really need to demolish them. Okay, they could be a potential liability. That land could be used for another purpose potentially. And so that is included in the project to demolish McKinley and well 16 and 17. The County Road 00 water main loop will greatly aid in the hydraulics of the west part of the water system. And then the two NDOT projects, which are substantial costs to the water department listed there. As far as the water meter replacement program goes, this takes care of 3 years out of a 5-year meter replacement program. The loan program wants to make sure that we set aside some contingency money So there's a 10% contingency there, and then non-construction dollars. So the total of the SRF capital projects is approximately 13.6 million. Generally, from a scheduling standpoint, we're in permitting right now. We're getting ready to advertise those projects and bids should they move forward, with the loan closing anticipated in the fall, likely October. And then construction will take place from 2020 to 2022. So that's one piece of the solution. The second piece is the annual capital and operational program. We want to make sure that we're setting money aside for water main replacements in the future. So after we replace State Road 28 and 75 in about 3 to 4 years, we want money to start a water main replacement program. Now, this is based on 0.5% of the water system per year. So if we went all the way around, that's 200 years to replace the water mains. That is, and it's a substantial cost, almost $1 million a year needed to fund that program. Tank inspection and maintenance. I mentioned, well, I didn't mention, but the west tank is included above it. I skipped over that line, but the other two tanks, the east tank and the Jefferson tank, will be due for maintenance in 2023 and 2025. I'm going to start collecting revenue to do that rehabilitation when it becomes time. Most likely, the next time that work is done at the west tank, it'll be a replacement in 20 years. And that tank will be at the end of its useful life. And then finally, annual lead service line replacement. To tackle those 1,500 lead goosenecks, $300,000 a year for 35 years. These are long-term programs that we have identified and tried to find ways to make them realistic from an operational standpoint, but also from a budgetary standpoint. I referenced the supporting documentation earlier, the PER, which I have with me, and also the capital improvements plan. And I just included some photographs to highlight the vintage of some of the assets that we're talking about today. Hopefully that wasn't too brief, but I'd be happy to answer more questions for you. If you have.
So the West Tank rehabilitation, is that something, from my information, does that go out the tower?
Yes, it will include, we want to start at the bottom, foundation, right? We want to make sure it's in good condition, any concrete repair of areas to make sure the moisture doesn't get in there and start deteriorating that concrete. And then we go up from there, OSHA upgrades, and then coating the inside and the outside of that tank.
And is that something that your firm does, or is that something that's put out for bid?
From the actual work standpoint?
Yes.
No, we don't do that work. We will be working with Chris. Tank Industry Consultants is a company that specializes in tank engineering. They have done your tank inspections for the last several years. So they have next week,
The 10th.
the 10th of August, they're going to remotely inspect that tank. So instead of wasting all the water and taking it out of service and potentially having an issue with fire during that period of time, they'll inspect it with a remote vehicle to confirm what they saw 2 years ago, 2016, 4 years ago. Identify, all right, here's the current list. Did it get worse in the last 4 years? They will then put together a bid package, and that will go out on the street for companies that do this type of work.
So this number then could fluctuate one way or the other.
Yes, all of these are estimates. Yep. With the exception of the State Road 28 cost, that is a cost that we do have in hand because that project bid here just this month as part of the NDOT road project.
I guess I seen it there at the top if I would look at estimated.
So the number that we have was based on the 2016 estimate, pushed forward 4 years for construction price increases. After August 10th, we'll have a kind of a double check on that number to confirm that it's an appropriate placeholder. So these projects and these costs and these annual costs serve the basis of the rate study that Andrew Lanham has put together. And I think he's prepared to talk about that now, if you have no further questions.
So do I have anything out of this one?
I seem to remember something in a meeting that we did, that instead of doing a 0.5% for 200 years, they were talking about doing 1% at just over $1 million. Is that still feasible? It seems like replacing some of these every 200 years is a long time.
It is, but the discussion was when we look at the costs and what we needed to accomplish, this was really the best solution for the rates at this time.
How much more would it have been to do the 1%?
From a rate standpoint.
It was over 100%. It was over 100% rate increase. But there's also some other issues regarding, there are limitations on certain customers that you have that you can't increase it beyond a certain amount without violating certain contractual obligations the city has. So there is a maximum cap that you can go to for certain taxpayers or for certain rate payers.
Is there any other questions for Dylan?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Appreciate the time in front of everybody again. So on the heels of everything that Dylan went through, they've identified, Westler has identified the capital needs for this rate increase. Part of a major part, of the overall rate increase, the primary part of the overall rate increase is due to capital infrastructure needs. And part of that, as you've seen, would be funded through an Indiana Finance Authority bond, excuse me. And the other part would be just an annual amount, an annual capital amount that's raised from raising charges that will go fund some of the items that Dylan spoke of. $875,000 a year for water main replacements, lead service at $313,000 a year, an annual tank rehab of $125,000. Now that annual tank rehab, you're not going to do a whole lot to a tank for $125,000, unfortunately. So some of these things are just going to accrue for a while, and then you'll be able to do larger projects, like a substantial project for a tank, a number of years down the line. But what I did, and I alluded earlier to the fact that I have the full copies of the rate study if you'd like. At the last Utility Service Board meeting, I had the whole rate studies there, and we were flipping around, going back and forth, so I thought it might be easier to hit, start some of the pertinent points here. When it comes down to it, what we're talking about is a 53.6% rate increase to across the board, all ratepayers. And if we start on page 1, the way that you approach the rate study is we take the financial statements and we have a test year. And the best test year is going to be a calendar year because there's no slicing a financial statement from one side to another. And we have the original rate study based on the 2019 year ended. And we take the internal financial statements, which have a lot of internal transfers of funds and things going all over the place. And then we adjust the historical financials to determine what is the operating requirement for the utility, as it stands for the 2020 utility operating budgets for the water utility, including your transfers to the Utility Service Board for insurance and benefits and salaries and wages, etc. So that's what you're seeing on page 1 is we're basically netting out any of the internal transfers and we're adding some things in there to get us to the 2020 budget. And that 2020 budget is $2.742 million at the bottom of page 1, bottom right. Now, all these little notes out here to the side, these adjustment notes, in the full rate study, every adjustment note that you see, it's shown on the schedule of adjustments to show exactly what we're doing there and why. So I'll distribute a copy of that for anybody that would like when we're done here today. So what we do is then we figure out what the annual operating expenses are, we pull that over, and there's a few other revenues that we're trying to do, to determine, or expenditures, I'm sorry, what we're trying to determine. Because we start from the expense side, and then we see what the existing revenues are, and then we determine how much more revenues we need to raise, and that's ultimately the increase. And so the water utility currently pays $75,000 a year to the city general fund for payment in lieu of tax. That's our understanding that we're gonna keep it the same at this point. Anytime that you raise additional revenues on the water side, there's additional utility receipts tax, so we adjust that upward because there'll be new revenues, there'll be additional taxes that you have to pay to the state. There are some existing bonds that are outstanding. Currently, the maximum annual payment for those bonds is about $533,000 a year. And when you lay in the existing bonds and the new bonds together, we redetermine what the highest payment in any year is, and that's what you put in here for the maximum annual debt service. Now, if you look at everything, for most years, the annual debt service doesn't really deviate a whole lot. It's within a few $1,000s, so we try to keep it as level as possible. But there is some structuring that we're doing to try to mitigate some of the rate impact on certain assets, like pipes that are in the ground that'll last 100 years. You can do a little bit of an extended financing on some of those, and we do have a portion of the current structure here shown that way. And we'll get into talking about the SRF bonds in a little bit. But the next component on here on page 2 would be the allowance for replacements and improvements. Based on the capital plan that Western Engineering has put together, and the breakdown that I discussed previously, $875,000 for water mains, $313,000 for lead service, and $125,000 annual allowance for the tanks. The annual capital capital expenditure or monies that you need to raise each year for just the capital component is $1.368 million. So we have the operating, some of the taxes, the proposed debt service, including the new bond, and the capital that we've discussed. Total revenue requirements are at $5.342 million. And you subtract out some of the miscellaneous fees that you might have a scrap fee here, or you might have another fee there that they're not really metered, so they're hard to predict, but we will take that off the top. And so ultimately what we need to raise is $5.176 million from monthly metered revenues. Well, currently, based on the test year, you're at $3.369 million, and so the additional revenue requirements is $1.807 million, or that divided by the existing overall revenues is a 53.6% increase. Now, some of these other calculations below here: net revenues for debt payments, annual aggregated maximum debt service coverage ratio, net cash flow available. Those are really metrics for bond financing to see basically how leveraged the system is. And so the lower that number, the more of your revenue goes to pay debt. And the higher the number, the more of your revenue goes to pay for annual capital allowances and operating expenses, et cetera. And so, so that's kind of that's this page in a nutshell. This is the summary page as far as the nuts and the bolts of the utility rate study. And then we've got some other pages that give you information about what does a 53.6% rate increase look like to the citizens of Frankfort. And I can pause for a moment if there's any questions on that page, or if I don't hear any questions, I'll kind of keep moving forward. So what we proposed, I think much like the last sewer utility rate increase, it was phased in over a number of years to try to alleviate some of the impact on the ratepayer. And so what's being proposed at this point too is also a phased rate increase. Now, that's beneficial for the ratepayer, but but obviously somewhat detrimental to the utility because the amount of additional revenues aren't going to be there until full implementation. And now fortunately, some of these large projects are being funded with bonds that would be issued at the front end. So that money would be available for those projects to go ahead and get started and being done over a couple year period as the rates and charges phase in to be able to start accumulating some of those additional capital monies for the annual, water main replacements, et cetera. But initially we're looking at a 25% phase one rate increase, followed by phase two rate increase a year later of 15%. And then the final phase three rate increase would be about 13.63% to get to the total 53.63%. And that first bump, that 25%, is really, it's an amount to get where we need to get to make sure we have enough coverage to issue the bonds. There are certain metrics that we have to meet with the Indiana Finance Authority, or whether you were to do open market bonds or whatnot. But that first 25% bump gets us there. And then the other 15 and the 13.6 helps us phase in for the rest of those capital improvements revenues. And this is across, your metered, inside, outside. You're still going to have a 25% rate differential between inside customers and outside customers. So whatever the inside rate does, outside rates payers are going to pay that 25% rate increase differential. It also is for fire protection fees, as well as fire lines. And you can go ahead and go to the next page. I mean, you kind of see, how it directly impacts a bill. And so you've got your minimum users there, current rates and charges, proposed rates and charges. You get your minimum user right around $15, or right at $15. And the components of that would be made up from the actual water charges themselves, plus fire protection, and you've got sales tax on water sales, and that gets you to $15. An average user, this was an amount that was basically determined by looking at the financial records and billing records of the utilities. An average user across the whole system using about 6 units per month, which is a little over 4,000 gallons a month. That user is paying currently about $20.50, and the large user at 10 units is about $31.50. So I'll stick with our average user for now at $20.50. You can see you're going to have about a $5 increase per month in that first year of the phase in. And it'll go up by another $3 in year two, and about another $3 in phase three, going in aggregate from $31.49 from $20.50. Excuse me. About $11 over phased in over a 3-year period, and that's monthly. You can see below the same thing for outside city limit customers, and I think this is really where the rubber meets the road, as far as from the folks that are interested in see what's going to do to their utility rate bill. Now, page 5 is really just a summary of what, the project that's being financed by the bonds. It's really a cost breakdown of what those bonds look like. They're going to be around $13.6 million. And you can see the breakdown all across here. The breakdown looks a little bit different than what Dylan was showing you, just because I've categorized it a little bit differently. But really, we get to the same number. Again, these are estimates. Put my fingers on this next page. You've got the next page. Sorry, the prior page was a breakdown of the project fund costs. Next page is actually the sources and uses of funds, or what a bond sources and uses would look like. And then page 7, I alluded to the fact that there was a when you look at the existing bonds and the proposed bonds in aggregate, so annual debt service on the right, we're pretty close. Once we get past the initial, phase in of the first year or two, your debt service really levels off there. Okay. And then after 2041, the 314,000 per year, those were the pieces of the project that really are replacing lines in the ground that should last well beyond the current ratepayers of this system. And so we finance that out long. Not only does it help, it helps reduce the overall rate increase and allow you to do more with the cash flows that you have, but it extends the repayment such that some of the folks that are using the system well after we're all done here, they'll be paying for part of the system that they're using. Last page, just a little survey. Now, I'd be happy to add any more, take away anybody on here that you'd like, but we'll just do a little survey as to how Frankfurt compares in the overall water and sewer rates and charges to some of your regional neighbors. Now, Frankfurt at 68.44, I've included on the sewer side, we've included everything that every fee that might be associated with sewer. Also, on the water side, we've included fire protection. Getting some of the detailed information for updating some of these is difficult because some of these, in order to just get the information without having to really pull teeth out, some of these may not actually include fire protection surcharges, or in some cases, they won't necessarily include the water in here. So needless to say, on some of the other city comparable invoices, it may not necessarily be comparing apples to apples. So what I'm saying is that theirs actually may be low for the folks that get their utility bill and there's a fire protection fee in there. We're showing it all. And in some cases, I know that they're not always including some of the fire protections. So that's just kind of a grain of salt when you take this, that some of their actual bills may be higher than what we're showing in apples to apples comparison. But realistically, obviously if you're at the bottom of the list, your ratepayers are paying significantly more for the same sort of consumption of 4,000 gallons a month. And it is what it is, that they have a system that they're financing and paying for. Some folks can pull water out of the ground. Some folks have to buy it from a larger user where it's distributed. I know that's the case for Whitestown. But you guys are just shy of, about 6 down, and within striking distance of Logansport and Peru. And again, tipped in there too. And some of those may not necessarily include the fire protection surcharge and some of the other things. So, that is my summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions, take any comments, and if there's anything that I can't answer tonight, or I'd be happy to take some notes down next time I come back to go through it with you. I'd be happy to bring anything else that you might like to see or like to present out here to the public.
The Armstrong expansion, I could be wrong, but did they say that we may need another lift station between Frankfurt and 65 to push?
That's a whole different issue. The county is in the process of doing that, and they are putting in the list. There's going to actually be 2 lift stations, I believe. But that's a whole different ballgame. That's wastewater, and we're talking a lot of water.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't part of the mist or something. Thank you.
Well, we've got Lauren Box here with Barnes and Thornburg. Obviously, anytime you go through this, there are some legal ramifications, and you got to update your rate ordinance, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, Lauren, were you going to speak a little bit? Yeah, and I'm going to be sitting right here, so if anything comes to mind, I'm not going to just run out of here real quick. So just talk to me, or if something comes up later on after I've left. I know Todd has my contact information, so feel free to run any questions to Jim or call me directly with my contact info.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I'm see you guys again. I think Andrew and Dylan really covered it all. You guys do have a copy of the ordinance here, the rate ordinance. Pretty standard. That first section just amends the Frankfurt City Code with the new schedule of rates and charges. And then the second section just includes a provision for bill credits, which is really how we're phasing in the rates in this proceeding. So as Andrew indicated, it's a 53.63% increase. It's across the board, so it will impact all customers the same way. Happy to, of course, answer any questions you guys might have, but a pretty standard rate ordinance.
Was there any changes to the class of water users? Depending upon volume, you guys keeping that exactly the same?
Yeah, it'll just go up by the same percentage, right?
I saw where it says Frito-Lay was not on here, just because they're off the scale.
It's a public hearing requirement in the chapter, so you guys will have to do that. So there will be an opportunity for the public to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken or Todd, do you have anything else to add to this, or?
No, not right now, not at this point. I appreciate everybody being here and taking some time.
Does anybody have any questions or concerns for anyone here? We've already had a motion made and seconded. Are we ready for a roll call if there's no further discussion?
I don't know what's in the proper order. But my thoughts too are, and I know this has been coming, but this is wonderful now to see in greater detail what we're needing to be considering. Two things, Councilman Beardsley is attending remotely this evening, and so he doesn't have the opportunity to look through these important facts and figures. And for us being able to see the enhanced documents this evening as well, I didn't know what might be the wisdom in tabling a vote until next meeting for to pass on first reading rather than to pass on first reading today. I mean, I still know enough. I don't know what the wisdom is in doing this, so we all have the proper amount of time.
I was gonna say if there's any amendments to it, it would be done on the second reading anyway.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
If we could get them scanned and get them to him before the second reading, allow him to look at them.
And all
Well,
this.
I was going to point out that I could get them sometime this week and have a chance to review it before the next meeting, be able to deal with anything like that, talk to Todd before, and if I had questions and be able to go forward.
Yeah, I can certainly send him directly. I apologize, I didn't know that he'd be attending remotely, so that's my bad. But I'll be happy to send everything over that I've given to
Any
you.
of us were eligible to attend remotely, so yeah, that's no problem. I just want to make sure everyone, this is important information, yeah, to see first. Okay, thank you.
What's the pleasure of the council? I mean, do we have to?
I think we should go ahead and pass it on first reading.
So we've got the motion made and seconded. Any other discussion, questions? You want to do a roll call, please, Carol?
Steve Beardsley,
Abstain.
Mike Bright,
Aye.
Brant Fuller,
Aye.
Joe Palmer,
Aye.
Megan Sheets,
Aye.
Clarence Worthen,
Aye.
Eric Woods.
Aye.
Motion passes. Is there anything else that anyone has to do with this conversation, or are we ready to move on? Okay. Next on the agenda is old business, and I don't have anything. Does any council member?
I'd like to ask, I heard through the grapevine that maybe Andy's got some information on where we're standing on the project out by the apartment complex out by Ascension.
The apartment complex, where?
Behind the new medical clinic, across from Walmart, the cottages, I think it's called.
The last word I heard on that was that their bids came in higher than expected. And so they're looking at, if they can revamp their design or what changes they need to make that a profitable venture. I don't have anything more than that at this time.
Okay, I just, I knew originally they were supposed to break ground.
Yeah, they're not able to right now, like she said, the bid. So there's some discussion going on right now, how they're gonna move forward with all of that, or,
That's all I got on that. Just
okay,
didn't see anything going on out there, so.
see exactly what direction they wanna go. Thank you. Is there anything else? New business, we have the budget hearing schedule. Our budget hearings are scheduled for Wednesday, July 29th, this Wednesday, starting at 8 o'clock, and we're gonna be at the, the neighborhood center, starting at 8, and I think they'll probably go until around 5. We thought that would be better than in this facility because we'd be able to social distance and maybe be able to work a little bit better, more spread out, and be able to work better, I think, than having it here. If that's okay with everyone. Yeah.
Does everyone have their book? The budget book? Okay. Be sure to bring that on Wednesday.
I would like to have that, electronically though. Do we have that in PDF?
I can get that.
Does anyone else have anything? And then following. That's right, I was gonna bring that up work session, but I'll bring it up now, okay. Since Amy's been doing all of our, live meetings, we could really use a computer. Is that your own computer, is that correct? We don't have a computer to do that. I didn't know if the council would be willing, there's $2,000 in a supply item for the council. Would we be interested in maybe purchasing a computer for that purpose? I know it'd be used for other than council, but
Split it with Board Works.
what,
Split it with Board Works.
split it with BoardWorks. It has no money right now, but I could probably dig up a little bit. What if we say $1,000 or under?
We could probably get something for under $1,000. Essentially, we're trying to put as many meetings as possible on YouTube, especially since we're trying to keep as much social distance as possible. And tomorrow night, we've got an annexation meeting and a historical preservation meeting. And there aren't a lot of offices in the city that have a laptop. And we can't broadcast it using the iPads or the personal devices until we have 1,000 subscribers, and we're a little under that. So until we can get our subscriber list up, we need to have laptops in order to broadcast city meetings on YouTube.
I do support, I think it's a good use of that money. I've long supported having these meetings, video or whatever, archive, but I think we do need to talk about the process. Let's get the computer, let's keep this thing going while we've got these COVID protocols over the top of us. But let's make sure at the end of that, we pick up where we're at on what we want long-term, which I think maybe we're gonna need a little bit more than just a laptop, but it's a good start.
It should be reimbursable under the COVID CARES Act.
We gotta figure out how that's all gonna work for sure.
We're still
but
working on that.
eventually, I mean, even if it goes into city general as a reimbursement, that would help. If we could do that. So are you thinking just split that with Board of Works?
Yeah.
I'm just taking you serious.
No, I'll make a motion to, we don't need an appropriation, it's already appropriated, right? So just a motion to spend an amount not to exceed $2,000 on necessary AV equipment for public meetings.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Steve Beardsley,
Aye.
Mike Bright,
Aye.
Brant Fuller,
Aye.
Joe Palmer,
Aye.
Megan Sheets,
Aye.
Clarence Worthen,
Aye.
Eric Woods.
All right.
Motion passes. Annie will get you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for reminding me. Is there anything else for tonight? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Joe, now work session. We'll take just a couple of minutes and we're gonna have a work